Tere hommikust, Tallinn, kas mind on kuulda? To the non-Estonian speakers, I was just checking whether my microphone is working. But I would like to say it's an immense privilege to be here. It's my home country, my hometown, and to be also back in this specific venue is a pleasure. Talking about real estate, there are two things without which our modern economies these days find difficult to do without. One is taxes and the other one is real estate. The way the Nordic Investment Bank links the real estate to its own mission is through sustainability. So we are a bank that is owned by 8 countries, 5 Nordic countries, 3 Baltic countries, and we have a fairly significant footprint in the real estate sector, and we focus specifically on green buildings and certified buildings. To build, to develop real estate, to renovate, it takes money. And that is probably why I've been invited here. So that's the ticket of bankers to the real estate conferences. My only other excuse is that we are as Nordic as this conference. Now, starting off, I will say a few words of who we are. And this is important for the context. Then I say a few things what we have done in the real estate, because I think there is no better way to do that than through real-life examples. And then I say a few things that you might find useful to become our next customer in real estate. I should have in this audience also my colleague, Sari. Sari, where are you? Here. Can you stand up for 1 second? So if you need a loan today, then she's your person to speak. Nordic Investment Bank is a government-owned bank, but we do operate based on commercial principles. But we do it with a much longer-term objective in mind, longer than even the election cycle in the democratic societies where we operate. And this gives us the chance to be the anchor through the various economic crises. Our goal is to work for the prosperous and sustainable Nordic-Baltic region, and our mandate is standing on 2 pillars. One is productivity, or if you want, in a broader sense, competitiveness, and the other pillar is environmental protection, which is this environmental sustainability, now also in a broader picture, climate change mitigation, climate change adoption, and these type of things. The flags of the member countries, our shareholders, are at the bottom of this slide. As I said, we offer long-term loans, so we try to be taking longer risk than your normal house banks would do. And we try to be complementary to your house banks. In the Nordic environment, most of the banks operate based on 5-year loans that are rolling over. And this is all good and great until there is an economic crisis. And unfortunately, we never know when the next crisis is. We have seen a few of those. One of my former bosses said, André, you only become a banker after you have seen at least 2 sets of crises. The first one, you think it's not your fault. The second one, you realize it is. So we offer loans anything between 5 years to 35 years in some cases. In private sector, most of our portfolio is between 7 and, say, 25 years, which positions us at the longer end of what you can borrow from the banks, and essentially gives you an alternative also to the bond markets for the larger companies that go to the bond markets. We do benefit from a AAA credit rating, which is the highest possible credit rating, and we have it both by S&P, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's. And this gives us the chance to be what I would call sometimes an importer of funding. We fund ourselves through the capital markets. We issue bonds ourselves, mostly in the countries that are not our shareholders. So we raise money from the US, Australia, even New Zealand, and we issue in those currencies, and then we swap ourselves into floating euro to mitigate the risks of our portfolio. But it gives us that effect, the macro effect, as well as to be, some people call it a vacuum cleaner, where you pull things in and then you do whatever you like with it. And we, as I said, we offer the stabilizing role to our economies. A few big numbers on the screen. We operate a balance sheet close to 40 billion euros. The number that was voiced out by moderator Andres before is the 8.5 roughly of authorized capital. And we have made total investments now over our 45 years of existence of 65 billion euros worth. We pay dividends, which is something that makes us different from the other international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and others. There is a very large number of those international banks, but we are the only one that is an international financial institutions, i.e. owned by governments, but we do pay dividends back to the shareholders. And the founding shareholders, the 5 of them, have actually received now an aggregate dividend more than 3 times the nominal payment that they have made into the bank. So for the member countries, it's not only that we try to deliver the impact, but it is also that we are trying to be a useful investment and sustainable ourselves also in financial terms. This is the map we have of our member countries. We can also invest outside member countries. And that is, again, something that makes us somewhat different from some of these other international financial institutions. We have investments globally, even though vast majority of the portfolio sits in our member countries. But we have, for instance, very recently financed a wind park in Poland, owned by Ignitis, the Lithuanian energy company. So to go beyond our region, we would like to see some sort of a link to our region. Nordic-Baltic investor, Nordic-Baltic technology, export that relates to it, or something along those lines. Today is the day that completes my first year in my current role with the Nordic Investment Bank, so I'm looking forward to celebrating this first year with you this evening. But when I joined last year in April, I looked at what the bank does and what the bank does well, and there are lots of things. But I also looked at the external environment, what has changed. And a lot has changed over the past few years, over the past 5 years. The previous strategy of NIB was actually put together 8 years ago as of today. So I took a fresh look together with my colleagues at the strategy, and we got the new strategy approved just 3 months ago before Christmas, and we have decided on a few things that we would like to do differently. We would like to go a little bit further down on our risk rating that we require from the customers. So we would like to take a little bit more risk with medium-sized enterprises. We would also like to use a little bit more financial institutions that we can lend to through credit lines that will then be able to lend to smaller enterprises. We would like to a little bit increase the non-member country lending. We are introducing new products, for instance, the sustainability-linked loans we have done now for a few years, where the loan interest rate is actually tied to specific, what is called KPIs, or key performance indicators. So we sit down with the client, the borrower, and we agree on a certain set of characteristics, be it CO2 emissions, see it energy or water use, resource use in their production process, see of maybe, if it's a biorefinery. I visited one in Norway last week. What are the emissions to the river? These type of things. And then if the company delivers that, then the interest rate after that certain checkpoint will go down. And if the company does not deliver it, then the interest rate will go a little bit up, which is the incentive that we tie into that loan agreement. The word additionality, you might not find it in every dictionary. What it means is value added. We try to be value adding. We don't try to do what your house bank could do, or what the bond market could do for you, but we would like to do something extra. For that purpose, we have, in most cases, limited our engagement to about 50% of the project size, to leave room to crowd in also other financiers, so that we don't want to come in and say, look, we are a government-owned bank, we have a AAA credit rating, therefore our pricing is always competitive, and we take the whole loan. No, we try to finance alongside others as a co-financier. This is the lending portfolio as of the end of last year, and you can see the country distribution, you can see the sectoral or industry distribution. This morning, I think an article was published by Ärileht with me, and I remember vividly how the journalist was grilling me, saying, how much have you lent to the Baltics, and is that enough? And very small amounts. I would say, if we put things into perspective, the joint ownership of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania at NIB today is 4.2%. The aggregate portion of the loan book as of today for the three countries is about 13%. So the Baltic countries have actually got a disproportionately higher amount of NIB lending than the shareholding would suggest. On the right hand of the screen, you see the sectoral distribution. We lend to both public as well as private sector. And the real estate, 7% of it is actually a fairly sizable amount. We're talking about 1.6 billion euros and increasing. And it's probably larger than what the other similar international financial institutions would have in their balance sheet. Green buildings, as I said, this is what we focus on. Certified buildings, certified by either BREEAM or LEED. And we are targeting one of the two top categories of those certificates in each of those two cases. I mentioned we are financing ourselves in the international capital markets. One of the products we have put out there now for more than 10 years is environmental bonds. So we actually raise money from green-minded investors, and we promise to them that we also spend the money, the use of proceeds of those bonds, to green projects. These are the so-called Nordic environmental bonds, NIB bonds. And this is the distribution as to how we have spent the money over the past 10 years, for instance. Again, buildings, disbursements as a proportion of the total money paid out last year alone is 10%. So last year was actually a fairly good harvest for us in the real estate sector, thanks to people like Sari and a few other colleagues. And the 25% of green buildings as part of our NEB portfolio, I think, is also fairly significant. I now get to some of these real-life cases. Vasakronan, a big company in Sweden, where we have financed a number of buildings with them in Stockholm, in Uppsala. The focus in real estate, perhaps for us, is not so much in office buildings, even though we do also do office buildings. But we try to tie in the academic potential, the social aspect, so that we are quite a strong player in the real estate that has to do with scientific clusters. I visited one close to Lund University myself recently. University buildings, school buildings, laboratories, hospitals as well, and some of the public buildings. Vectura is a deal we signed about a month ago to finance a redevelopment of the Bromma Hospital in Stockholm. This one has a LEED gold certificate. A building currently being developed in the center of Helsinki, 40 million 7-year loan. Significantly, 97% of the materials are recovered from waste. This one has a platinum certificate, so even higher. Entra in Norway, again, a number of buildings. In Oslo, and in Trondheim, university being one of them. And then one in Latvia, Preses Nams, the press building that we signed also quite recently, which has a BREEAM Excellent certification, and is one of these flagship projects now in the Baltics that is being developed, being certified building. There was one other deal which we signed this week, by the way, which is in Skellefteå in northern Sweden, where we are financing one of the tallest timber buildings on this planet, 20-story timber building close to about 80 meters high. So that's quite significant, and it's also, of course, brings that technological challenge with it. So now, what would it take, and what could be the useful thing you take away from this first opening session here to potentially become an NIB client? As I said, these are the two pillars of the mandate that we have. One is productivity, and the other one is environment. So if there is anything on this slide that resonates with you, that you think, okay, maybe that's the argument. So we try to, as a bank, we try to be more than money. So we do challenge you sometimes to take the next step, and maybe to take the next step ahead of your competition. And I always say that the proof is in the pudding, i.e., you hear back from your customers what made and what did not make sense. And I'm glad to say that many of them tell us that, look, you know, it was thanks to your experts that came in and asked us these questions, put the challenge on to become a little bit greener ahead of the competition, then in the long run is something that could be a competitive advantage. More on the mandate. Energy efficiency is something which, of course, is also a very important component. Not only do we want to generate energy from green sources, but we would also like to use more of it and more efficiently. So therefore, the refurbishments actually score fairly high on our environmental mandate framework. So this is the framework on which our expert team called Sustainability and Mandate is working, assessing each and every project that goes through the approval process before it hits the desk of the credit committee. And then, of course, anything you can install on your buildings that makes it either energy neutral or minimizing the energy resources, such as, for instance, the solar panels. Real estate within the EU is responsible for about 40% of the total energy use. In the Nordics, it's even higher. And it's responsible for about 36% of the total CO2 emissions. And that's probably somewhat lower percentage in the Nordics. But this is the reason why we think that it is really important to engage in the real estate sector, work with people such as yourselves, and try to make the next generation real estate better, more sustainable, and lower cost eventually. This data here has been pulled by one of our analysts to show how many buildings are there numerically in our member countries. And you can see Sweden, Norway leading the way, and the four smaller countries, Baltics and Iceland, perhaps lagging a little bit behind. That data may not be quite up to date as of last night. So these numbers are changing and hopefully growing across the whole region. And it gives you the indication as to which of those are BREEAM Excellent certified, which of those are BREEAM Outstanding Excellent certified, which is even higher category, and then the top category of the LEED certificate. This is the first bullet point, just confirms what I said earlier, that it is something where the EU taxonomy is also increasingly looking into as to what is the total energy use for individual sectors, including real estate, how much goes into the construction materials that are necessary for the buildings, This is, by the way, one of the new strategic aspects that we have put into the new strategies, that we try to go also more into those what I would call hard-to-abate sectors that are brown, perhaps, and should be greener. And we are willing to take also a little bit of financial risk as well as reputational risk, working with cement companies, working with steel companies, working with larger machine building for construction and forestry and so on, to try to have that greater incremental step forward, not just financing windmills, which everybody knows is green and is relatively easy to do, and there is also increasingly commercial money available for that. Coming to the end of my slide deck, this is the way that the NIB real estate portfolio specifically has increased in terms of the amounts on the left-hand side. So we are currently at roughly 1.6 billion euros, and as you see, the red line going up is the percentage of the portfolio. We really, 10 years ago, we were roughly 0.5% of the total portfolio was real estate, and today we are over 7%. So that, again, is one of these elements of proof in the pudding that we are willing to put our money where our mouth is. Finally, to look forward, mandate does remain very relevant for us. As I said, we want to be more than money. We have lifted also internally within the internal structures, we have lifted the head of mandate to be a member of both the executive management committee as well as the credit committee, which I think is very important. There are lots of moving pieces with regulation. Some of it is yet to be clarified, and it's in a motion, including the EU taxonomy, where I think there are still significant issues. We would like to diversify our exposure more, so to make sure that we are a bank equally available to enterprises, corporates in all our member countries. And then finally, we try to do more of the NIB environmental bonds to enable even more financing to your individual projects. I would stop here. Happy to take any questions as long as the moderator says we still have a little bit of time.
Yes, we have, of course. Do we have questions to Mr. Küüsvek? I think, yes, over here. I will bring to you the microphone. Please, sir.
Good morning. Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
Very diverse market, but one there that seems to be growing. But have you considered data centers? What's your thought on that for investment into the Nordics for data centers?
The answer is yes. Have we done many? No. Would we like to do? Yes. We are looking at a few of those, but that's exactly where I would say, the real estate meets the need of other sectors, be it scientific potential, be it the IT, be it the telecom. So I think very relevant question. I have to disclose I'm also a chairman of the supervisory board of Rail Baltica Estonia here, and we just lost our CEO to Green Energy.
I know, that's
here. So you got a very great man, and perhaps we can work together.
Yes, I think so. We should talk.
Tõnu Grünberg is his name.
Yes, I know them.
Thank you. Any more questions? Maybe, André, can you elaborate? I think many of us are wondering how expensive will the money come after the ECB and Fed have risen the rates a little bit. What do you see in year 2022? Does it affect also your agreements, contracts? How expensive the loan money will become besides Euribor?
This is always the most difficult of the questions.
That's why I wanted to ask this, maybe. Do you want to know the answer? Yes.
Well, the reality is, if you say, does it affect what's happening? Yes, it does, absolutely. Anything that happens in the markets affects everybody in the markets. So that's just the rule of thumb. Now, in terms of the price that the end borrower needs to pay, the price always consists of the base rate and then the credit margin on top of it. The base rate we have hedged for ourselves, and of course, we need to see where the longer-term trends now go in terms of the rate. I have personally said earlier, and I'm happy to repeat it, that I don't find it exactly normal that the price for money, which is represented through the base rate, interest rate, that rate is negative, is not something that fits normal economies. You know, money has to have a time value. There has been a trend and perhaps willingness by the central bankers to increase these base rates. And we have seen that happening in the UK, in the US, Norway. Each of those three central banks has also indicated there will be more. Some have indicated even how many steps they will make during the course of this year. So the base rate in those countries goes up. Euro is a slightly different animal because Eurozone is an amalgamation of all these different countries that have very different fiscal budget positions and so on. Whether European Central Bank is able to or even willing to follow suit is a question mark. When it comes to the price of money to the end borrower, I said the second component is the credit margin. This depends on the risk. The riskier you are, the more you need to pay. And that's true not only when you borrow from us, that's true everywhere. So it is those two components. Can we be competitive? Yes, we can, because our own funding cost is as low as it can possibly be thanks to our AAA rating. I would stop here. A long answer and no numerical outcome of it.
No, but we like long answers because, I think with that said, Mr. Küüsvek, will be you staying around for the rest of the day?
I'll stay around and happy to speak to any of you that would like to share an idea, have a request or propose something that makes sense.
Well, with that said, Mr. Küüsvek, please do not leave yet. I do have a little gift that I would like to share with you. Thank you for your time and input, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Here we go, sir.
Aitäh.
Veel kord aplaus, aitäh, härra André Küüsvek.